Thank you all so much for joining. I'm so happy to welcome you all to today's webinar on understanding LGBTQ plus family building and benefits trends. Today, we're excited to have an incredible panel of experts who support LGBTQ plus individuals and couples on their path to parenthood. I'm honored to introduce you to our first panelist. Bonnie Sechrist is the Director of Health Management Consulting at Willis Towers Watson. Bonnie is a senior clinical consultant with over 30 years of experience in the health management industry. Dr. Mark L., founder of the Medical Director of Reproductive Medicine and Associates of Connecticut. He's also the founder of Gay Parents to Be and a partner at Gay Parents with Kids. He's also board certified both in obstetrics and gynecology and reproductive endocrinology and infertility. And of course, we also have Lisa Greenbaum, the Chief Client Officer at Progeny, which is a fertility benefits company that happens to list on Nasdaq. Lisa leads revenue generation and business development at Progeny. She has over 25 years of experience in the healthcare industry. She was previously at WebMD rather, where she was Group General Manager of Medscape Professional Services. So this is a very important topic to us at Nasdaq, and I am, of course, very honored to be hosting this because it's something that I personally really care about. I would love to one day be able to start a family as an LGBT person, and I think in many ways I thought that either it was too expensive or out of reach, and so I think it's just one of those topics that we've been dying to cover, and certainly during COVID, we're all going through these strange times and feelings and thinking about our lives, and I think it's just a really poignant moment to be having this topic. So I'm so thankful to the three of you for joining us. In today's webinar, we'll discuss LGBTQ plus individuals and couples, how you could build families, what it means to actually have truly inclusive, equitable family building benefits, and what it means for employers. And if you are joining us from your ERG, what you can do to advocate with your HR team, with your benefits team, to take advantage of a program or to make sure that your benefits are as inclusive as they could be. So we'll start with Dr. L. If you could just give us a little bit of insight into the number of LGBTQ families or LGBT individuals who are looking to build families. Like what's the size of this group that I think, I certainly call myself part of.
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. L, and thank you, Josh, and everybody for joining us today. I mean, it's really an amazing, and as a member of the community and a parent through egg donation and surrogacy, I'm just thrilled to get some messages out there for everybody. So, in a recent survey by the Family Equality Council, the number of LGBTQ plus families is positioned to grow dramatically in the upcoming years. In fact, they're predicting 3.8 million LGBTQ plus people are planning on expanding their families in the coming years. Probably about 60% of those will be formed using biological parenting pathways, and we'll talk more about that. And the other 40% are going to be through foster parenthood and adoption. So there's a lot of choices, and there's a lot of different pathways to talk about. So historically, there weren't a lot of choices. Historically, a lot of us couldn't kind of live our true lives or be our true selves. But, especially with the Supreme Court decision just a few days ago, if you want to be a parent, it's an incredible responsibility, but it's also, an amazing journey. I can speak to that personally and professionally for over 20 years of helping people have families. So, they need to, what's been amazing over the past 10 years, and I've taken this journey with many employers and employee groups, and I'm so thrilled to be doing this today, is that, as people are starting to think about building their families as members of the LGBTQ plus community, employers are really thinking about how to support them. So it's really quite amazing.
And let's talk about, the basics. How can LGBTQ people start families today? What are the methods and what are perhaps some of the treatment options that are out there?
Sure. So I kind of break it up into three pieces. Biological parenting, which means that one member of a couple is genetically related to the child, right? Or an adoption pathway, or a foster parenthood to adoption pathway. And for our community, we have cisgender females, cisgender males, and the trans community. So for cisgender females, couples and individuals, there are a lot of choices because there's a lot of ovaries and uteruses available, so to speak. So it's pretty interesting to talk about. So those people will need access to a sperm source. I don't technically love the term donor sperm, but that's the term that's used. And that can be a sperm source from somebody that's known to them, or most commonly actually through a sperm bank who fully screens sperm donors for medical conditions, genes that cause disease, and infectious diseases. Once the sperm source is identified, then a treatment pathway has to be defined, and that's going to be done through a fertility doctor, maybe your OBGYN, and the choices for cisgender female include simply, placing sperm in the vagina. So that would be artificial vaginal insemination. Then there's intrauterine insemination, where we place the sperm high up into the female reproductive tract inside the uterus. So typically, if we get more than 5 million sperm up to the top of the uterus, then we've got, millions of sperm trying to fertilize the egg. So it's a higher success rate. And then you've got in vitro fertilization. So in vitro fertilization is a 40-year-old technology. There's over 8 million children born from IVF. And for cisgender female couples, they may be choosing IVF maybe because of reproductive aging, or maybe they have biological reasons to do in vitro fertilization. But what's been exciting lately, as success rates from IVF have improved, there's more same-sex female couples that are choosing what we call shared IVF or reciprocal IVF. And that's where one mom-to-be goes on fertility medicines to stimulate her ovary to produce multiple eggs. Those eggs are retrieved via a surgical procedure that we do in the office. And then those eggs are fertilized in the IVF laboratory. And the other mom-to-be goes on hormonal medication to prepare her uterus or her womb to receive the embryo. Then we transfer the best embryo into the mom that's going to carry the pregnancy. And this is really a beautiful story about how two moms can participate in the process. Obviously, it's complicated, but it's well within the grasp of kind of our modern IVF suite. Changing gears a little bit for cisgender men out there, same-sex couples and singles, you need more help, right? The reality is that women are probably 90%, responsible for the success of this process. But obviously, the biological parenting options for male couples are going to involve the need for an egg source or an egg donor and a gestational carrier. That egg source will often come from an agency, occasionally come from someone known to them, or perhaps a sister. And the surrogate or the gestational carrier is a woman who has a history of a good pregnancy and is usually done with their own family building and happy to help somebody else have a family. And those most often come from agencies. And in fact, there's probably over 10,000 gestational surrogacy journeys ongoing in 2020 right now. For members of the trans community, there are many options available. These really have to be personalized to where they are in their transition and who their partner is. And certainly you'd want to talk to a reproductive health professional comfortable with treating that community to make sure you're following the best pathway. Adoption and foster parenthood pathways are always options for everybody. those are going to go maybe through adoption agencies and often linked to Department of Child Services in the state that you live in. I think it's really important for people of the LGBTQ plus community that this is hard work. It's thought. It requires a team. It's going to require your desire to be a parent, the help of a fertility clinic and a reproductive endocrinologist usually, and then you're going to need a mental health professional to help you think about who your donor sperm or donor egg's going to be from, and then you really need the help from an experienced reproductive attorney. One of the things that sometimes is kind of forgotten is that our parental rights as a couple have to be protected. So when a child is born to an LGBTQ family, the vast majority of the time, only one person is genetically related. So the other mom or dad has to have their parental rights protected, go on the birth certificate, and so on. So it really requires, a group of people to put together, and it takes, a few months to source those people. But it's really successful, and I'm really excited to be able to help people do that.
Well, thank you for explaining all the options. I know none of these options are inexpensive. Could we talk about the costs and how do people afford to do this? I mean, not one of those options sounds particularly easy to start an LGBTQ family.
Yeah, I mean, it's really worth noting that we're having this conversation, that employers are starting to cover things. But, fertility therapy is expensive for our allies, right? And it's even more expensive because you have to build your team for members of the community. The desire for parenthood, though, is a desire that's independent of gender identity and sexuality. And navigating that is going to involve, working with your employer. Hopefully, it's going to recognize that you need benefits, that you have a different type of fertility challenges. Typically, in the straight world, couple needs to meet a traditional definition of infertility, which means a year of unprotected intercourse. But in our community, you can practice all you want. You're never going to have a baby, and you need help, right? And so we have a different kind of fertility. We have kind of biological infertility, and it can be a huge financial investment for the non-IVF options. The range for that can be somewhere between $5,000 and $20,000, depending on how you're going to build it and how many attempts you need to achieve pregnancy. For the IVF options, IVF alone is going to be somewhere around $15,000 to $20,000, and if you're going to add in a surrogacy journey with that, then the number can actually approach more than six figures. So it is a significant commitment. It requires planning. It requires help. Many people make great sacrifices to be parents. This is a intentional parenting pathway. So they're going to take on mortgages on their home, dip into their 401ks, work multiple jobs, make extra money, look for a job for an employer that recognizes their status, right? And certainly we've had people who change employers simply because they want to have a family. So obviously getting help from friends and family occurs as well. It takes time to understand how much you're going to need. I find that most people, because the desire to be a parent is so strong, figure out a way to navigate it.
Great. Well, we've covered the methods, we've covered some of the costs. Bonnie and Lisa, could we talk a little bit about some of the challenges with employer-sponsored benefits? Because I know that certainly they are not all created equal.
Sure. So I think to start the conversation, it might be helpful to understand that today, 2020, roughly 50 to 55% of employers actually provide any type of a fertility benefit. And so there's a large number of self-insured employers that still have not added those benefits for any member of the workforce. So I think that's one of the things to recognize, and especially if you're looking for a job, that's becoming a critical part of recruitment and retention in terms of talent and talent management. The second piece to that is that for those that actually do provide a benefit today, employers are recognizing, to Dr. L's point earlier, that the current definition of the standard carrier fertility benefit was exclusive to those in the LGBT community. So much of the work that I'm doing and my colleagues within the consulting practices is actually working with employers to examine those benefits, evaluate and look at them from a more inclusive perspective and point of view, and actually working with them to change the language so that those benefits are available and now applicable to those within the LGBTQ community.
That's a really interesting point, because I think that some companies may have these programs, but I don't know that LGBTQ employees know whether that benefit is actually inclusive. Lisa, how do you actually know whether the benefits that your companies have do include LGBTQ individuals?
There's several checks that an employer can do or an employee can do to ensure that, in fact, the benefit is equitable, which means it is available equally to all members of the employer's community. One of the first things they can do is to make sure that, in fact, there isn't a requirement for a diagnosis of infertility that includes 6 to 12 months of heterosexual unprotected sex, because that simply precludes members right off the bat. And so while that is a really necessary element of ensuring that a benefit is equitable, it's not sufficient to do all of the things that a benefit needs to do to be truly equitable. Employers and employees need to make sure that things like IVF, IUI, and the reciprocal IVF that Dr. L talked about are all approved, that there is reimbursement for donor tissue purchase, that there is coaching and education and also reimbursement for adoption and surrogacy services, that there's a network of physicians who are trained to help members no matter what their path to pregnancy is, as well as that the benefit has people working on staff who are trained to work and provide emotional support to members of any community, regardless of their path to pregnancy.
So I think we all understand now that this is an expensive process, but also there are some of these programs, and it's really important to understand whether your program covers all of the different parts because of the cost of it. If we have so many members of ERGs on the call today, what kind of advice would you give to an ERG on how to prepare talking points for their HR team, on why it's important for employers to do this, how they can do it, and kind of what are the benefits to them?
So I'll kind of look at this from two different perspectives. I'll start with, for those companies that don't currently have a benefit, the challenge for the HR team that really tends to be the driver behind this is that they need to build a business case internally to actually add that benefit for their employees. So it's understanding the challenges that the community faces and becoming parents. Many of the HR folks are knowledgeable about the cost associated with this. But I'd say the other piece is finding a senior leader or executive that can help you champion that within the executive team, to really, who's able to voice the point of view and also the importance of this to just your general health and well-being and your ability to be a productive member of that employer's community. For those that actually do have a benefit today, what I find and what's interesting is that for some employers, they haven't really paid that close of attention, if you will, to the language on how that benefit is written or structured. They just go to they have their carrier partner or partners. They say, you know, we want to provide a fertility benefit. We want to turn that on, but they don't necessarily dig into the details, if you will. And this is one of those topics where the devil is in the details around the language of that benefit. So part of that is raising the awareness with their HR team, so to ensure that that benefit is structured and open to everyone within the community.
Is this cost effective for the employer? How do you kind of sell the cost benefit analysis with your HR team?
Sure. So one of the things that we saw historically, and I've actually had employers who at one point had fertility benefits and they removed them, is because the program was unmanaged. So our recommendation and our position, my point of view is, as you have that fertility benefit, it really needs to be well managed, not only for the users of that benefit to ensure that they're getting the best medical care and treatment, that they're being referred to centers of excellence and providers of excellence, that they have the help and emotional and financial support needed to make the best decisions to come to a successful pregnancy, but also to then get to the best outcomes. So that's critically important. And within that management program, we often find that when people have that assistance, that cost of the program actually helps then in cost avoidance that you see if the individual is left to manage that on their own. So I'll go back to historically what we saw is, okay, an employer says, yes, we're going to add this benefit, everyone's included, but it's now up to you to manage that yourself. Well, you know that you have a limited amount of funds. Your goal is to become pregnant as quickly and successfully as possible. And that at times may lead to not the best decision making in terms of having multiple eggs implanted that then result in multiple births that then have other problems and complications associated with that. So the goal is really to drive to best practices, drive to those best practice providers through that program management to get the best possible outcomes, which in turn then can help that employer both in the short and long term save on medical costs.
So just a reminder to everyone tuning in, we will be taking questions at the end of the webinar. So if you have a question for Bonnie, Dr. L, or Lisa, please put it in the Q&A and I will make sure that we address it at the end of the webinar. Bonnie, can we talk a little bit about some of the trends in companies that are adding inclusive family building benefits? What are some of the things that we're seeing today?
We're really seeing a more comprehensive, holistic approach to family building. So while fertility is our focus today for today's conversation, it's really about providing benefits that encompass the entire spectrum around family building. So it's not just about becoming pregnant, but how then is that pregnancy managed? What's the parental leave or or bonding leave that's provided in support of that? What kind of caregiver benefits do employers provide in association with this topic, as well as return to work and parenting? So that it's a whole spectrum, if you will, of different programs and services that we're interested in and really supporting for those that are building that family.
Fantastic.
And Josh, I would add one of the other really interesting trends that we're seeing right now, in addition to what Bonnie shared, is the real importance to fortify culture. And we are definitely at a inflection point in our country and in our world where family, equality, and financial wellness have never been more important to people. Yeah. And family building and fertility benefits are absolutely in step with cultural events right now.
And I would also, my other thought is that it's not just about the fertility benefit, but I would say also stress the importance of adoption and surrogacy, particularly for the LGBT community, because the research shows that the community is 4.5 more times likely to actually adopt children and 6.5 times more likely to foster. So I think having benefits that include adoption and surrogacy, particularly around surrogacy, given the cost and the legal fees associated with all of that, with that process, it's critically important to look at that as well. And those are trends that employers have recognized and where we are seeing movement and evaluation of the support that they provide today.
Makes total sense. I mean, culture is key at every organization right now, especially now.
Mm.
So Lisa, I know you work with so many employers. What's some of the feedback that you get from companies that have added these types of programs in terms of how it's transformed their organizations?
Yes, this is a question that we love to answer because it really is the joyful part of what all of us do. We hear again and again from employees who are so very grateful for the addition of the progeny fertility benefit. And we also hear from leadership in HR teams who say they're actually having employees come in and they're crying happy tears instead of sad tears in their office for a change. I think there are a couple of stories that really articulate the gamut of what it's like for members of the LGBTQ plus community to have a benefit that is equitable. We have a story of two members who actually both work for the same organization, and they were very interested in starting a family and buying a home and the things that you want to do in milestones in life, and they very much wanted to do reciprocal IVF, and they were just struggling to figure out how they could afford to do it, and their employer added the progeny benefit. And I'm happy to share that it is a little bit over a year and a half later, and they are in a new home, and they are getting ready to celebrate the first birthday of their son. So it is just a very heartwarming part of it. But I think the other side of the spectrum that's really interesting is we had an employee whose company moved from a traditional carrier benefit to progeny. And when that happened, she shared a story with her HR leadership that she had actually really been shamed when she called the carrier representative to ask about access to the benefit and was told, well, you're going to have unprotected heterosexual sex for a year before we can do anything to help you get access to the benefit. And, you don't have to be a physician to know that's not going to work. And so the ability to come and have support at progeny from a patient care advocate who understands all paths to pregnancy was really life-changing for that member.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the future of parenthood. I think we kind of understand the challenges of today. And Dr. L, what does the future look like? What developments will we see on the horizon?
I think the future's looking a little brighter. Certainly, 50 years ago, there were not a lot of options. And, the first child through surrogacy for gay male couples was in the 90s, right? But, safe family building options for the community, thankfully to employers and groups like Progeny, allow us all to move forward. So the nuclear family, heterosexual mom, dad, child, only actually represents about 46% of families in the United States. So there's this recognition that there's lots of different types of families. And so moving forward with that, we've discussed different pathways to parenthood. In the future, I think there's an opportunity for, maybe more assessment for genes that cause adult disease. We already have the ability to test embryos for chromosomes that lead to, chromosomal disorders. We have the ability now to also screen for genes that, let's say, are associated with breast cancer and things like that. So, fertility therapy right after cancer therapy is actually the most changing field in medicine, barring what's happening, unfortunately, with this horrible pandemic, right? So there's a lot of advances that people are working on, and it's driven by this desire for parenthood. I mean, I get questions all the time. Can two moms or two dads both be genetic parents? And the answer to that right now is no, right? But maybe in the future, through stem cell technology, that answer might be yes. And I think that for people who want to be a parent, you can, the vast majority of people won't have an infertility problem. They have, like a biological infertility problem. They actually have wonderful success rates. So getting through the hurdles, getting the support, getting the financial support, working for a company that recognizes that you want to be a parent just like everybody else is important. So I think that all of us working together, we're going to be able to turn those dreams of parenthood for the LGBTQ plus community into reality, and recognizing adoption and foster parenthood as viable pathways and supporting those as well beyond biological will allow us to have our families, and then we become ambassadors for the rest of the world. The reality is the United States is leading this family building pathway, and other countries will follow.
Absolutely. Well, we do have quite a few questions from the audience that I'd love it if we could all address. The first one is, as an ally, a father, and a friend, how can I help with discussing parenthood challenges, supporting a significant other, and ultimately be helpful in this complicated process of becoming a parent?
Trying to dissect that question. I think that information is hard to gather. I think there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation out there. So I think, sources, Family Equality Council, Human Rights Campaign, Gay Parents to Be, Gays with Kids, Men Having Babies, LGBTQ Task Force, all provide resources for family building. And I would want to point that family member that you're trying to support there. And also, really, while there are hurdles and speed bumps in place, tell them that you're going to help them get over them and through them. And taking the first step, maybe just to talk to, a reproductive endocrinologist or perhaps an OBGYN, or maybe a therapist that's experienced in family building options for the community is going to help get through the clouded pathway of choices. Members of the community are faced with more decisions than anybody else. So helping them through that, I think, is important.
Great.
And Josh, I would say in the workplace as well, we hear all the time from HR leadership that one of the most important decision points in changing a benefit or adding a benefit is employee demand. And so being an ally and raising that employee demand is so very important as well. Great
point. Okay, so another question. What are the advantages or disadvantages of using a known donor or an anonymous donor? Can we talk a little bit about that? Because I don't think a lot of people know.
Sure. So the advantages of using an anonymous donor, we'll start with that, is they're usually more easily available. They're still going to be fully screened. These are going to come from us either a donor egg agency or perhaps a frozen egg bank or a donor sperm bank. For members of the community, as a dad, my kids are going to be like, well, we have two dads. Where'd the egg come from? So our children are always going to know that somebody else was involved. So having a degree of release of information or knowing who the sperm source or egg source was is going to help proactively answer those questions. We all do things for our we all want to future think of what the questions for our kids are going to be. So when you work with a known donor, that could be a donor that's connected through an agency that's willing to meet you virtually, perhaps willing to exchange contact information, and that's going to require a legal agreement. A known donor could also be the brother of a mom-to-be, or the sister of a dad-to-be, right? And we do those cycles frequently. Those are really special because you're accessing both family trees, but everybody really has to be effectively counseled by the mental health professional. Known donors, it is a gift, and you have to recognize that that they do go through some hardship for it. Most donors that aren't family members or friends do get compensated. Sperm is more easily available than eggs. So recognizing that the expense of using an agency donor or an egg source comes into play as well. So summary is if you use a known donor, you're going to actually get to at least do a Zoom with them, perhaps meet with them. Your children are going to have access to them in the future, and you're going to have an ongoing relationship with them so you understand other new medical issues that come up. And you're going to be proactively providing a door open for your child or children if they want to know more.
What's the cost range for building a family through surrogacy and, then surrogacy and certainly egg donation?
So the surrogacy aspect of a family building journey usually involves an agency, legal fees, and compensating the surrogate. And that kind of just bucket is somewhere around $80,000 to $120,000 when you kind of put in all those pieces. If you're going to add in an in vitro fertilization cycle to that and screening everybody for it, you're getting up into the 150 perhaps plus range, depending on how much help you need and how everybody's being compensated. So it is a significant cost for anybody who needs that kind of support.
Great. Another question we received was, how does the New York infertility mandate apply to same-sex couples?
I think that might be a better question, maybe for Bonnie or Lisa. It was written to be inclusive, but I haven't seen it come across my practice as in use yet. So I actually just had a couple right now that we're looking into whether it's going to be covered or not as a either insemination or IVF for a same-sex female couple or a male couple. So Bonnie or Lisa, do you guys have any feedback on that?
I'll be honest, I haven't run into that yet either. Unfortunately, I don't have a great answer, but certainly can get one.
Wonderful. Well, we can certainly add that into the chat and send it as a recap when we send a recap to all the panelists.
Perfect.
And to all the attendees that joined us. Another question that we received is aimed at ERGs talking to their HR teams. What other benefits, health benefits, do you think, I think this is specific to you, Bonnie, are important to champion, not only for LGBT employees, but also our trans brothers and sisters? What are the kind of community benefits that are really important to make sure that your organization has?
So I will add, and we didn't talk about this as much, but within the fertility benefit, I do think it's important to include the trans community, but also then some of the education to the HR team around those challenges, as well as the considerations. So that is, as individuals are making the decision, again, I go back to having the right program in place to support that fertility benefit. So, such as a patient care advocate with Progeny, they're able to get individuals to the providers and facilities, centers of excellence that can help them through the decision-making process before they begin that transition, and then also how to best leverage and utilize benefits once that they've been through that transition.
For a member of the trans community prior to transition, to be able to cryopreserve gametes, sperm or egg, is really transformational to leave the door open for whoever their future partner is and their future family building journey. And in my practice, we look at that as the same as somebody with a medical condition that has to freeze eggs, perhaps cancer or something else, that the members of the community, the trans community need that support. And to freeze sperm and egg and keep them stored till you're ready to use them is a significant financial burden. So to have employers be open to that and understand it is transformational, intended.
And I would also add that employers understand that they could be parents of adolescents in particular. So that's come up with some of my clients, and that the employer actually hadn't considered or thought of that until a specific case came across or came to their attention. But it was actually then the parents of that adolescent or teenager who was going through the process, or at least beginning the process, to think about of that person's fertility for the future.
So another question that we got was kind of, I think, directed for the HR professionals on the line. How do they choose the right plan for their organization? Because I think, this is a pretty progressive benefit, not at every company, but, it's certainly still a new benefit. And it's probably a little difficult to navigate those waters of choosing the right plan for their organization. How do they go about that in a smart way?
So obviously I'll say it's part of that's about having the right consultant or someone who's helping them go through, as I mentioned earlier, helping them build that business case and think about all of the different pathways that lead to or individuals that may have access or who want to have access to that particular benefit. I think where things begin to differ a little bit, as I mentioned earlier, we have sort of two groups of employers, those that currently have a benefit. So the first piece to that is examining the benefit, and we've talked a lot about cost. Does the benefit that you actually have in place today, is it reasonable given the cost and the related to the pathway to having a successful pregnancy? So a $5,000 medical benefit and a $5,000 RX benefit combined together isn't necessarily going to be supportive or get you there. So again, it's looking at what's the provision for medical, what's the provision for pharmacy, and the more progressive employers are now moving from that more lifetime max benefit to a cycle-based benefit, because we believe and have found that actually what the individual gains out of that benefit is much broader than what you get within that lifetime max. So that's kind of the one pathway. The second pathway then is for those that don't have a benefit today. Many times those employers begin to explore adding the benefit, and the bottom line reality is that by adding a benefit, they are adding additional claims cost to their overall medical spend. But it's about doing the right thing and standing by your commitment to inclusion and diversity. And if you're, as well as those ERGs that come forward and individuals who are really advocating. That's why I think it's important to have an executive leader within the organization to also advocate and be at the table during those discussions to help drive the decisions that are being made around adding that cost. And so that's why it's important that if you're going to, and as you build that business case to add that new benefit, that everything is done appropriately and to actually manage what those costs might be. So I think as a person coming forward to advocate for that benefit, to say, and we're not only asking that you cover fertility services, but we want the right program in place so that we as the user are protected and get us to the best outcomes. And you, the employer, we know this is an investment on your part. We don't want it to jeopardize the business as well. So I think having that understanding of both sides of the impact is helpful.
And Josh, I would add on to that, there are several key elements, whether you are adding a benefit or making a benefit decision to change a carrier. That one is a benefit plan design that is comprehensive and has access to all of the latest technology so that members don't have to make cost-based decisions. Do I do genetic testing? Do I not? Do I put multiple embryos in? Do I not? Making sure that you have a network of physicians who have great geographic access, but who also, again, are trained in all paths to parenthood. Yeah. Making sure that there is support for members. This is an incredibly difficult journey, emotionally, financially, and physically. So making sure that that support is in place. And again, that support is being able to be given across all different communities. And then also thinking about the prescriptions. Bonnie talked about the cost of medication a little bit. And not only is it expensive, it's also difficult to administer, and some has to go in the refrigerator and some has to, be injected here and what have you. And so making sure that you've got an integrated pharmacy portion and program for your fertility benefit as well. and then making sure that whoever your provider is delivering outcomes to you as the employer so that you can actually quantify, did we have fewer treatments than we would have had if we only had national average outcomes? Did we reduce the number of multiple births and actually avoid the high-risk maternity and NICU costs that are associated with twins and triplets? So there are, many things to really push on to make sure not only that your benefit is equitable, that it's also comprehensive and value-based.
Fantastic. We've talked a little bit about, the cultural implications that this can have internally, but let's talk a little bit about externally, because, certainly if you're an LGBT group on the line and you're championing one of these programs, the internal possibilities and benefits to morale, et cetera, are incredible. But there's also this fantastic storytelling opportunity for organizations to say, this is where we stand on this. And also, here's how we're going to attract the best LGBTQ plus talent and the best. And for actually, this benefit often is not just for LGBTQ people. So how do you talk to organizations about the external storytelling? Because it's so important in terms of attracting talent and also, the cost benefit analysis here.
We work with a lot of companies who really are wanting to tell those stories and wanting to be part of diversity and inclusion, honorees and winning awards. And so they will often have their members speak up at public events, not just internal to their own companies, and tell their stories. We have a lot of members both in the LGBTQ plus community and the entire employer community who will tell their stories publicly through Progeny's This Is Infertility podcast or through many other avenues. And it really is such an important way for employers to publicly demonstrate their commitment to the D&I initiatives that they have. And it is part of why we do see employers who win incredible awards. And when they look at the summary plan design of their benefit, they realize that it's precluding a portion of their population from taking advantage of the benefit. So that's part of the external, looking and storytelling that they can do when they have equitable benefits in place.
And I'm sure for many ERGs that are on the call, thinking of your recruitment team as an ally in this discussion, Bonnie, what are some of what are the high level bullets that you want to send your HR team if this is like a benefit you're trying to get added?
First is that roughly 83% of millennials actually will change jobs related to family building benefits and whether or not they're supported. So there's incredible pressure being put on HR teams now with respect to recruitment and retention. I would also say that in terms of high level bullets, that we'll go back to some of the earlier figures, the cost of family building for LGBT community, particularly as you look across the various options, can get into the six figures. And so with that, that's a huge financial burden. It's a huge emotional burden that directly ties then the productivity with respect to the employee being able to deliver their best and be their best every day.
Fantastic. Well, we're just about out of time. Lisa, Bonnie, or Dr. L, do you have any last parting words for our amazing guests?
I just want to thank everybody for listening. And, this has been, a journey getting to this point. I don't really love the word journey. It's a trek. Our community is on this trek for inclusiveness, and it's just so wonderful to have people recognize being a parent as a pathway that's necessary for employers. And while there's a lot of decisions to make, there are people out there to help you over those hurdles. So take the time, do the research, gather your resources, and start walking in the water. And there'll be people there to help you. So good luck.
Amazing. Well, Lisa, Bonnie, Dr. L, thank you so much for joining us for this incredible Pride Month panel. Attendees, we really appreciate you joining. We will be sending a recap and a shortened post with some kind of high-level bullets on Nasdaq.com that we'll post and make publicly available. Feel free to email me if you have any questions. It's josh.matches@nasdaq.com. We're happy to follow up with you offline, or if you want to be connected to Progeny or learn about other programs, we're always here to help and happy to answer questions. So thank you so much, and have an incredible rest of your Pride Month. Thanks, everyone.